There's something that happens when we start using our camera instead of our phone to take pictures. One thing that happens is we look at our phone and we get a certain kind of shot and we say, this makes sense to me. I get what I'm getting. And then when we use our camera, we're going, I don't know why, but I can't seem to make it look the same way. I'm going to talk to you about how we do what we do with cameras, what you're trying to get when you say, I'm going to switch from using my phone to a camera. And I hope I'm going to help you come up with some thoughts and feelings on ways that you can do this just a little bit better once you understand a couple of basics on the camera. When we start looking at the difference between what our camera shoots and what our phone shoots, what are we reacting to? Well, I think there's sort of three things that we react to. I think one is that with a camera, you can accomplish a little bit more with depth of field. Now, the term basically means the separation between the stuff behind you. So if you look at even this image is on a 4K video, but it's a very small sensor. It's like, look at the size of the sensors on my Google Pixel. Now, if you're an iPhone person, I also have an iPhone, but we're gonna do it with Google. Depth of field is often accomplished by having a good enough sized sensor in your camera and good enough sized glass in the front to pick up what you got going on. That's depth of field. And what that tends to mean is that you get that separation. The other thing that you get or can get differently with a dedicated camera than you might with a phone is what's called dynamic range, which is the ability to have more and more layers of light and darkness and tones and whatnot in your image. Dynamic range is kind of a function of your sensor inside your device, and your phone sensor for photo is decent, but it just can't match the dynamic range of most modern digital cameras, 10 plus years or so. Third is exposure. What happens with a camera, and we'll go into how phones cheat in a second, but what happens with a phone versus what happens with a camera is you can really dial in how dark or how light you want things. And then you start to learn in editing, which you don't edit as much with your phone, you start to learn in editing that if you make things a little more dark, you can sort of bring up the lights a little bit and get really dark shadows and really bright lights. You don't blow out the sky so that the sky is just a white nothing in the background. By the way, you can totally do that with a camera, but what you find is that as you're practicing and learning some of this, you get a lot of better opportunities to kind of deliver some value there. Now, I said, how do cameras cheat? How do phones cheat? I'm going to keep saying camera by mistake because I mean the camera on your phone. Phones cheat in a couple different ways. One is that they almost always have turned on something called HDR, which I think is high dynamic range. What that means is it goes in and uses algorithms to say, take a version of this photo that's dark, take a version of this photo that's light, glue them all together, let's stack this, something like that. It basically tries to make the best possible of your darks and your lights, but it does it in a very algorithmic way. It's great, it's wonderful. If you like what comes out of your phone, be happy with what comes out of your phone. I'm not like phone shaming here, but it is doing something different than what you get on your camera. So sometimes when you switch to using a camera, you go, oh man, this isn't quite going the way I thought it was gonna go. The other is that a lot of times devices have AI retouching built into them. They retouch certain elements of what you're doing so that your phone will be taking a better edited photo of what you can do with your camera right out of the box. So sometimes you'll take shots on your digital camera and you'll say, oh man, they don't look anything like what I get off my phone. This must be a crappy digital camera. And what you're not realizing is that there's some editing that has happened. Your phone has done some editing that you don't know about, basically. And the third is that there's modes, right? So there are modes that you can set up, like if you, most phones have sort of a portrait mode. And when you take a photo in portrait mode, it makes a blurry background like bokeh. Well, it's an effect in this case. It's not the same as what you get with a lens in a real, standalone camera. And so you start reacting to the modes and saying, oh, I don't know why I can't get those same pictures with my camera. It's just because you haven't quite learned. By the way, a lot of times people don't edit their camera, their phone photos One thing you should think about is using a phone editing software, a photo editing software for your phone. Snapseed, for instance. Snapseed is free. It's available for Android and iPhone, and you could do some really good editing with that. So if you're gonna stick with your phone, at least throw a decent editor on there as well. We'll talk about some camera basics though, that'll make it so that you don't have to use your phone to get the kind of photo output you're looking for. This is kind of the meat of the conversation. I wanna say right off the bat, that there's no shame in setting your camera to whatever the auto mode is and leaving it that way. If you've got it set to auto, there's no shame. Auto mode is a great way to pick up and learn how to use your camera, and sometimes you're not trying to do something especially tricky, or sometimes you don't have time to act as fast as you need to. I have been at concerts where if I have a camera that has auto mode, oh yeah, here's an example. The Canon G7X, this is a lot of people's favorite to bring to concerts because it's considered a point and shoot, so it's not exactly the kind of camera that you get stopped at security for. I have this in auto 100% of the time because you know when I'm least going to want to figure something out? When I'm sitting there watching Weezer and I get a chance to take a shot. Now, one thing I do to make this potentially go a little better, and this is a setting you can do in a lot of digital cameras, is we'll get back to this in a second, but I set this to RAW mode, which means that not only does it output a JPEG, which is great, it sends me a RAW file, which is all the possible elements that the sensor picked up, whether or not you had your settings right. And so it means you could do some editing after the fact. But the point basically, there's no shame in setting it to auto. Every one of the cameras that you buy that's a digital camera, even some of the old DSLRs from 15, 18 years ago, have an auto mode. This is the Sony a6000. I've talked about it a bunch on my channel. This has an auto mode. This is the Sony a7 IV, sorry. This one has an auto mode as well. You know, if you ever hear people, the minute someone says to you, pros don't use auto mode, that person's not a pro. That person has opinions, but that doesn't mean they're a pro, because plenty of professionals use auto mode. The reason you might not want to use auto mode is you might want to get something a little different than what your camera's best guess is compared to what you're thinking you want to cover. And that, by the way, is the difference in using a phone camera. Your phone camera is pretty much 100% best guess, unless you really want to fiddle with the dials. You can do that a little better on iPhone. There's a Leica app that you can put on an iPhone that's actually supposedly pretty good. But the reason you might eventually switch to a camera, like a dedicated camera, is you have access to dials, you have access to switches, you have access to buttons. There you go. You have access to buttons where you can set up stuff so it can be ready for you to change in a heartbeat. So we're done with auto. Let's go into the first thing that you really need to know. A lot of the things that you're worried or don't understand how to do are covered in something called the exposure triangle. There are way better videos to go super deep on the exposure triangle, but I'm going to give you a couple things to think about right off rip. Here's one. So there's 3 parts of the exposure triangle. They control 3 different aspects of how you shoot your camera, and they all contribute to whether or not a photo is dark enough or light enough for you to do something with and see what the output is. In the exposure triangle, there is aperture. Aperture is how wide or small the lens is, or the opening in the lens. It's how much light you can allow in. So if you look at this right now, it's turned on. That is a somewhat smushier aperture, because I'll explain why it is in a second. But if I open it up even more, do you see it opening inside? That's the aperture being controlled. So you see that like black spot in the middle of the gray spot? That's aperture. But what is that actually doing besides making kind of a cool fishy effect? What it's doing is aperture controls how much light is let into the sensor. But another way to say it is aperture also controls how much of a picture at any point is going to be in focus. What you've heard people say sometimes is the difference between a fast aperture or a slow, or a fast lens and a slow. And they'll say things, and you'll never know what they're saying. You need an f-stop 1.4, you need an f1.4 lens, or an f1.2. Or someone will say, oh, that lens is crappy, it's only an f4. these are all absolutes, and they're also how people end up getting upset that their picture doesn't do what they want it to do. I literally saw a post the other day in a Reddit where someone said, I don't know what's happening. I can focus on one thing and then everything else is blurry. And it was because they didn't understand that Aperture controls depth of field. I've got two pictures that I can show a really quick example. I was at this Comic-Con inside of a public library. I was talking to this guy, and he had been the yearbook photographer at his school years ago. But it was clear that he wasn't quite exactly, too deep into it, let's say. He knew some of the terms, he just couldn't quite remember why they were what they were, which is fine. I'm not throwing any rocks at the guy. But I took a photo of him and he goes, wow, that's a pretty good shot of me. I actually like it. And I took another photo where I opened up the aperture wide, which blurs out everything behind him. And then he reacted. What happens? Look at this photo here. What happens is people react to that sense of like, ooh, that looks like that's a professional photo. Fine. It's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing. I'm not even saying it in a negative way. But the way that works is aperture. So what you learn through these processes is that if you have something with a wide or open kind of a lens setting, like an f1.4, f1.8, as far as f2 sometimes, if you can get kind of close, you can blur the background, and some people like that. Now, if you want to shoot kind of a scene where there's a bunch of stuff around, well, then you might have to go to f5.6, I think it usually is, f8. If you want to do a landscape with all kinds of things around, or if it's a super sunny day and you want to control how much light is getting into your lens, then you can go to something like an f11. But if you do that, your camera's going to go, oh man, I need a lot of light for this to be a thing. The exposure triangle is all about covering light. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about shutter. So if the aperture is how much light you can let into something, shutter is kind of the little window that opens and closes on your camera to let in the light for how long. So on one is how much light, one is how long. So if your shutter goes really fast, that means that you're not giving a lot of light to the sensor to see what you're going to see. Here's the thing though, if you let your shutter stay open longer, and if something moves, you get blur. A massive amount of the problems you've had with blurry photos is that for whatever reason, your shutter, even if it's set by some other system besides yourself manually setting it, your shutter is such that it's too slow for the action that it's seeing. Like if you ever see old-timey photos, there's lots of blur because those people had to stay there for a very long time perfectly still. So there's a lot of old-timey photos that aren't exactly tack sharp, as the kids say, for that. But then what I've learned is that if you don't keep your shutter somewhat fast, you're going to have the blur problem. So now you're balancing between aperture, like how blurry do you want the stuff behind, how like that kind of depth blurry, and shutter, how fast can you keep this thing such that stuff freezes. You don't always want something to freeze. Sometimes it's nice to see the movement. Like maybe you want to see car headlights whizzing by, or maybe you want to track a car going by something, and so that the car stays in focus, but the background is blurry to show movement. There's a lot of ways you can play with shutter. And that's why a lot of times you can set your camera to what they call shutter priority, which is where you say, I would like this camera to pay attention to the shutter setting above any other setting. You could do that. There's another mode called aperture priority that says, I want to control this, and then you decide what my shutter could be. And on more modern cameras, what you can do is you can set something like aperture priority, like I want to control the aperture more than any other aspect I want to control. And you can say, but never let the shutter go below a certain depth. People who have like photography education channels, they will spend a whole video just explaining that detail, but minimum shutter speed is something you could set in most cameras. Those are two. So how big is the lens opening, and meaning how much focus do I want to control? That's how you control depth. So if you want a big wide open scene, you can do f8 or f11. If you want to kind of split the difference, you could do like f5.6 or whatever. If you want to blow out everything and just keep one thing in focus and everything else is blurry, that's like f1.4 or f1.8. The difference in 1.4 and 1.8 in modern lenses is money. You spend a lot more for an f1.4 than you do an f1.8 because of the quality of the glass. So I've talked about two of them, aperture and shutter, but this is a triangle. What's the third one? ISO or ISO, and I cannot even a little bit remember what that stands for. But ISO, the way I always think about it is, it's kind of like a turbo boost on the other two settings. It's sort of saying introduce a little bit of artificial light. What it used to mean was certain film qualities, like actual film had a better rating to kind of take on a little more dynamic range, even if you were shooting in darker modes. And so what it means now is I will add all kinds of noise to your photo, meaning I'll put all kinds of particles if you look in certain areas. People try to avoid high ISO. There's a lot of people out there that are like ISO 100 no matter what. Here's what I've come to learn. If you let that one run free, if you basically protect your aperture and protect your shutter, and you allow ISO to make up the difference if something looks too dark, in most modern photo editing software, Adobe Lightroom, Luminar Neo, Darktable, you can find that you can take it and turn on this AI mode that will clean up the noise as best as it can. Good enough for government work. You're decent to go. So learning that gives you so much power, because then with ISO, you just set a minimum and a maximum range. Mine, I think, is set to like 100 all the way up to 12,800, and you're good to go. You can just go. Knowing that detail, knowing that very specific part of the triangle, the ISO part of the triangle, means that you can focus a lot more of your thoughts, feelings, sentiments, and creativity on the aperture part. How much of the scene do I want to keep in focus? And on the shutter part, how much time do I want to allow the light in? Do I need to freeze it because something's moving? Or can I go slow and take in even more light because, I don't know, I threw it on a tripod like this. This is one of the biggest parts, or the triangle is the biggest part of why photos look a certain way that makes you feel like you're looking at them the way you've seen it on someone else's equipment or someone else's photo. Like, you see a nice looking photo out there, a massive amount of it is that. The one last element that we should talk about, even a little, is editing. If you've seen anything I've done, including these videos, anything, my photos, my writing, my books, my everything, I am a certifiable lazy editor. That said, once you learn a couple of things about editing, everything just seems to go a lot better overall. I have come to really appreciate editing in photos because you don't have to shoot perfect when you're out there. You could shoot something a little dark, you could shoot something a little crooked. For some reason, I do not know, even though there are lines on the back of this camera, I tilt a little bit when I'm shooting. I don't know what it is. I forever am taking a picture and tilting. So guess what? In editing, there's a function that lets me just grab one corner of the picture and turn it, and these lines will show up and say, that's more straight. I can fix it in post. It's fine. Some people will say you're cheating if you're editing. That's shenanigans. That's silliness. Now, some people, as watching this video, might have gone, oh my gosh, I never want to edit ever. That's fine. People who buy Fujifilm cameras, they love the fact that they can just shoot straight out of the camera and it looks pretty good. Hardly any edits whatsoever. Everything's great. People can be very happy about that. Great if that's you. But editing means that you can change stuff about the darkness, you can change stuff about the shadows, you can pull up or down the color saturation a little bit, you can change brightness. Now you can go crazy, you can use some of these AI effects. You can pull things out. For instance, I was with these guys. They were at Cape Nedic Light, Nubble Light in York, Maine, and they were talking about their lighthouse photos and how they always pull the power lines out. There's a couple of phone lines that bring power out to the island, to the lighthouse. And they talked all about the fact that they pull those out. And I thought, whoa, I didn't know that was just a thing. And they all talked as if everybody does it that way. Luminar Neo, one of the software editing softwares I use, Luminar Neo has a button right in it for AI that just says erase power lines. And it does a pretty good job of devastating all those power lines and putting in its best guess at what should be behind what you just took out. Should you or shouldn't you? If you are a documentary photographer, if you're like a journalist, no, you should not edit things out of your pictures. If you're doing this for creativity and art, edit your face off. Now, I have some personal opinions about editing. Like for instance, if I am out on a fall scene and it doesn't look exactly orange and red everywhere and it doesn't look super leafy, I'll play what I got in front of me. I will not add all kinds of fall colors to make it look like colors. Luminar Neo, for instance, if I don't like the sky, I can just click and grab another sky and throw a whole different sky on there. I'm never gonna do that. It's just not interesting to me. But if you want to, and you're like, I don't care what the sky looked like that day, I want this kind of sky, go for it. There's no reason not to. But with editing, if you want to take a few extra minutes, you can really make your photos shine. All right, let's wrap up. This one was a long one. Listen, always as always, drop me an email, chris@chrisbrogan.com. I love hearing from you. It really, really gets me going. If you have questions, if I didn't cover something, comment below. Like, make sure we do it. Subscribe. Please subscribe. Okay, as we're wrapping up, photography is meditation you can do on your phone, except I tend to say let's not use our phone because it gives you another shot to not pay attention to where you are in the moment. If you use a standalone camera, like a point and shoot, or a nice little APS-C camera, or even almost a professional grade kind of a camera, it benefits you to learn a bit about it so that you can enjoy it. But if you're enjoying it without knowing all these details, great. I made this video for you if you're the kind of person who goes, man, why don't my photos look the way I thought they were gonna look? That's why this video exists. I'm here for you. Thank you so much for your time. I'll catch you next time. See you.